The hall was already busy long before the evening began. Chairs scraped softly across the floor as people searched for good seats. Some talked in low voices, others laughed, and a few stared at their phones while waiting for something interesting to happen. The place was not grand, but it felt important. A small stage stood at the front, lights fixed above it, ready to shine on anyone brave enough to step forward. He walked in with easy confidence. His posture was relaxed, shoulders back, steps slow and steady. People noticed him without trying. A few nodded in recognition. Others whispered his name, though not loudly. He was used to this reaction. In spaces like this, he often stood out. He had performed many times before, and his past successes followed him wherever he went. He took a seat near the front, crossing one leg over the other. From there, he could see the entire stage. He glanced around the room, scanning faces out of habit. Some looked nervous, others excited. He smiled to himself. None of them felt threatening to him. Not tonight. Near the side of the hall, she entered quietly. No one noticed her right away. She wore simple clothes, nothing flashy or eye-catching. Her hair was pulled back, neat but plain. She carried herself carefully, almost as if trying not to disturb the air around her. She found a seat closer to the back and sat down, hands folded in her lap. He did not look her way at first. His attention was on the stage and the judges' table. Only when someone brushed past him did his eyes move briefly across the room. That was when he saw her. He barely paused. She did not fit the picture in his mind of someone worth worrying about. She looked calm, almost too calm, like someone who had wandered in by mistake. He assumed she was new, maybe inexperienced, maybe just curious. His eyes moved on quickly. In his mind, the night was already planned. He would perform well, as always. The audience would respond. The judges would nod. Nothing unexpected. The lights dimmed slightly as the organizer stepped onto the stage. A microphone squealed for a moment, then settled. The crowd grew quieter. A short introduction followed. This event, they were told, was meant to discover talent that often went unnoticed. It was open, fair, and welcoming. Anyone could surprise everyone. He leaned back in his chair. He had heard speeches like this before. They always sounded hopeful. In reality, it usually came down to the same few people standing out. People like him. As the first few participants were called, the evening moved slowly. Some performances were decent, some were forgettable. A few were painful to watch. The audience clapped politely each time. He watched with mild interest, sometimes checking his phone, sometimes whispering comments to the person beside him. With each act, his confidence grew stronger. Then her name was called. There was a brief pause. For a moment, no one moved. Then she stood up from her seat at the back. A few heads turned, curious. Most people barely reacted. She walked toward the stage with measured steps, not rushing, not slowing down. The sound of her shoes against the floor echoed faintly in the quiet hall. He watched her now, more out of boredom than concern. She climbed the steps and stood under the lights. The brightness made her blink once, but she quickly adjusted. She looked out at the audience, taking it all in. Her face showed no fear, but no pride either, just focus. He noticed how small she looked on the stage. The space seemed to swallow her. He assumed the performance would be quick and unremarkable. The organizer asked a simple question, something routine. She answered softly, but clearly. Her voice did not shake. That caught his attention for half a second. Still, he dismissed the thought. Calm did not mean capable. He had seen many people who looked confident until they failed. As preparations were made, she stood still. No pacing, no dramatic gestures. Just waiting, his mind drifted. He thought about his own upcoming moment. He pictured the applause, the familiar rush. He barely noticed when the room fell silent again. She was ready before anything began. There was a brief second where the entire hall seemed to hold its breath. She closed her eyes for just a moment, then opened them. He leaned forward slightly, arms resting on his knees, not because he expected something special, but because he wanted to see how quickly it would be over. The first sound filled the room. It was not loud. It was not dramatic, but it was clear. He frowned. Just a little. Something about it was different from what he expected. It carried a calm strength, a steady control that did not rush or beg for attention. The audience shifted in their seats. A few people looked up, suddenly alert. He straightened. The sound continued, smooth and intentional. Each moment flowed into the next without effort. There was no sign of hesitation, no sign of nerves. He felt a small crack form in his certainty. He told himself it was nothing. Maybe she had practiced one part well. Maybe this was the peak. But the room was changing. People were no longer whispering. Phones were slowly lowered. Even the judges leaned forward. He felt it before he admitted it. This was not what he expected. She remained steady, eyes focused, body relaxed. She was not performing for approval. She was simply doing what she knew how to do. He swallowed. For the first time that night, doubt brushed against him. Not fear. Not yet. Just the uncomfortable feeling that he might have been wrong. As the performance moved forward, the atmosphere grew heavier, deeper. It filled the space between breaths. The audience was no longer watching out of politeness. They were watching because they could not look away. He felt his confidence shift, no longer solid but uneven, and still. This was only the beginning, he had thought. She was no challenge. The night had just started to prove him wrong. After the first few performances, the room had settled into a quiet rhythm. People were attentive, polite, but there was a certain expectation in the air. Some performers did well. Others stumbled slightly, and the audience responded with polite applause. He watched them, confident as ever, thinking this would be another routine evening for him. The same old faces, the same small surprises, the same predictable outcomes. He had faced plenty of competition, and he believed he knew exactly what to expect. She, however, was different. While he adjusted his posture and smiled confidently to those around him, she sat quietly at the back, hands folded, eyes calm and observing. She did not appear nervous. She did not fidget. She was simply present, taking in every detail of the room, every movement, every sound. There was a quiet intensity to her, one that he barely noticed at first. But it lingered in the corners of his attention. People often underestimated her. They assumed her quiet nature meant she was inexperienced. They thought she lacked confidence because she did not draw attention to herself. But her calmness was not weakness. It was preparation, a kind of patience that he had not yet learned to recognize. She had spent countless hours alone, practicing, refining, learning her craft in silence. While others sought validation through applause and recognition, she sought only perfection in her work. As the evening progressed, more performers came and went. Some were flashy, trying to impress with loud gestures or exaggerated techniques. Others relied on gimmicks or tricks to grab attention. He observed them all, nodding politely, thinking to himself how easy it would be to outperform them. He had done it countless times before. It was almost routine. Then she was called. The room hushed, and she rose from her seat. There was no rush in her steps, no sign of panic or nervousness. She walked with a quiet determination, each step measured and calm. He noticed her finally, but still, he did not take her seriously. He assumed this would be quick, a simple demonstration that would end with polite applause. Nothing more. He leaned back in his chair, confident in his assessment. She approached the stage with grace, but there was nothing dramatic about it. No exaggerated movements, no forced expressions. She simply moved as she had practiced 1,000 times before, each step deliberate, each breath controlled. The room seemed to hold its breath, though most people were unaware of it. There was something different about her presence, something subtle but undeniable. Even without realizing it, the audience was beginning to lean in, their attention shifting from polite interest to genuine curiosity. He tried to dismiss it. Surely this was just a small act, nothing that would challenge him. He had seen many people who looked confident, only to stumble when faced with the reality of performance. But as she positioned herself, as she took her first measured steps onto the stage, he felt a flicker of unease. It was faint, almost dismissible, but it was there. The first sound of her performance began softly. It was not loud, not attention-grabbing, but it was clear, precise, and intentional. He frowned slightly. This was unexpected. He had anticipated nervousness, hesitation, small mistakes. None appeared. Every movement, every note, every gesture was executed with care and purpose. She was not performing for applause or recognition. She was performing because it was a part of her, and it showed in every subtle motion. The audience began to shift. Some exchanged glances, unsure at first, then slowly leaning in, captivated. The polite murmurs faded. Phones were lowered, conversations stopped. Even the judges, who had seen countless performances, leaned forward, pens paused over their notes. Something about her presence demanded attention, though it did not beg for it. He sat forward slightly, his curiosity piqued. He was still hesitant to believe she could be exceptional, still clinging to his own assumptions. But there was a growing awareness that he had misjudged her. Her calm confidence was unlike anything he had encountered before. It was quiet, almost invisible to those who did not pay attention, but powerful in its subtlety. Her movements were natural yet refined, a perfect balance of control and expression. Every step flowed into the next without force or hesitation. She had clearly mastered her craft, and it showed in the seamless way she carried herself. He felt a small twinge of admiration, quickly masked by the stubborn part of him that refused to be impressed so easily. But he could not deny the impact she was having on the room. The energy had shifted. People were no longer waiting politely. They were fully engaged. He found himself scanning the audience, observing their reactions. Faces softened, eyes brightened, shoulders relaxed. There was a collective sense of wonder, though no one knew quite how to describe it. She had created an atmosphere where attention was inevitable. It was not forceful. It was not demanding. It was simply there, a quiet authority that drew everyone in. He tried to focus on the technical aspects, analyzing the movements, the technique, the timing, but even that was challenging. She moved with such fluidity that it was difficult to pinpoint where the skill ended and natural ability began. Each motion seemed intentional, each note precise, but it did not feel mechanical. It felt alive, real, human. He realized that he had underestimated the power of quiet confidence, of preparation, of presence. He had assumed that skill alone was enough to dominate a space. But here she was, demonstrating that it was not just skill that mattered. It was the way one occupied the stage. It's the way one connected with people without demanding it. It's the way one could communicate through talent alone. As her performance continued, the tension in the room grew. The audience was captivated, the judges attentive, and he sat there, grappling with his own shifting emotions. Admiration mixed with discomfort, respect mingled with disbelief. He had not anticipated this challenge. He had not anticipated being affected by someone so quietly confident, so subtly powerful. Her focus never wavered. She did not glance at the audience. She did not seek approval. She did not perform for validation. She performed because it was an extension of herself, and it resonated with everyone around her. That authenticity was what made her exceptional, what made her stand out, what made him realize that he had been wrong from the start. He found himself leaning forward, unable to sit back comfortably. He could no longer dismiss her. The performance demanded attention, not through force or showiness, but through undeniable presence and talent. He could feel the shift in the room, the collective engagement, the silent acknowledgement that this was something remarkable. By the time she finished, the room erupted in applause, though it was not forced or obligatory. It was genuine, heartfelt, a response to the quiet power of her performance. He remained seated for a moment, processing what he had witnessed. She had proven, without a single boast or grand gesture, that he had misjudged her completely. He realized that this evening would be remembered, not for his confidence or his past successes, but for the quiet, undeniable talent of someone he had dismissed too quickly. And for the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of humility, a recognition that there was always more to learn, always someone who could surprise him, always a chance to be challenged in ways he had not anticipated. She stepped off the stage quietly, returning to her seat at the back. There was no celebration, no self-congratulation. She simply sat, composed, calm, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But everyone who had watched knew that something remarkable had occurred. And he knew it too, even if he struggled to admit it openly. He had been wrong to assume she was no challenge, and the realization left him both unsettled and profoundly aware of her quiet, extraordinary talent. The room was silent in a way that made every small sound feel bigger. Her presence on the stage was not just noticeable now. It was commanding, though she did not raise her voice or move dramatically. Each step she took, each motion of her hands, had a calm certainty. People leaned forward, unable to take their eyes off her. The audience had stopped clapping politely. They weren't just watching anymore, they were listening, absorbing, almost waiting to see what would happen next. He sat in his chair, the tension in his chest unfamiliar. He had been in rooms like this countless times, always the one who drew attention. Always the one who left people impressed, sometimes even awed, and yet, sitting there now, he felt something that unsettled him, a creeping realization that he might not be in control of this evening, as he had assumed. He had underestimated her. He had judged her too quickly. Her focus was remarkable. She didn't glance around the room for reactions. She didn't pause to gauge the audience's response. She simply moved with intention, each action flowing naturally into the next. It was clear she had practiced, yes, but it was more than practice. It was instinct, honed through dedication, through countless quiet hours where no one was watching. Every detail, every movement, seemed deliberate, yet effortless. He tried to analyze it. Maybe it was luck, he thought at first. Perhaps she had learned a single impressive piece, and that was all this was. He had seen people get lucky before. But as the moments stretched on, that explanation fell apart. This was not a fluke. This was talent shaped into art. It demanded respect, even if he wasn't ready to admit it. Around the room, the audience's reactions shifted subtly, but unmistakably. Heads tilted, eyes widened slightly, hands paused mid-clap. Conversations died out. People exchanged glances. As if sharing a silent acknowledgement, this was extraordinary. Even the judges, who had seen so many performances, leaned closer, their pens poised over their notebooks. Capturing the moment with careful attention, he found himself holding his breath without realizing it. There was a strange mix of fear and admiration swirling inside him. He didn't want to be impressed. He didn't want to admit that she had talent. And yet every fiber of his being forced him to recognize it. She had the power to change the narrative of this night entirely. She continued her performance,
building gradually,
not rushing, not forcing. There was a rhythm to it, a natural progression that kept everyone captivated. She was telling a story, but it was a story that spoke directly to each person in the room. It wasn't loud or flashy. It was subtle, but the impact was profound. Each note, each gesture, each moment resonated deeper than any of the earlier acts. It was clear she had something the others did not: authenticity. He felt a lump in his throat. It's not out of sadness or loss, but because the power of witnessing. Someone poured their soul into something so quietly and confidently was overwhelming. He had seen performers before, talented ones, yes, but none had moved him this way. There was a truth in her performance that couldn't be ignored, no matter how much he tried to convince himself otherwise. The way she carried herself also told a story. There was humility in her posture, a groundedness that made her seem approachable, yet untouchable at the same time. He realized that this wasn't just about skill. It was about presence, about being able to fill a space without demanding it, to command attention without seeking it. That realization hit him harder than anything he had felt on stage before. He found himself scanning the audience, seeing their reactions, watching their faces soften, their eyes brighten, their attention completely consumed. For a moment, he wondered what they had seen in her that he had not. Then he understood. She was fearless in a way he had not anticipated. She didn't seek validation, didn't perform for applause. She performed because it was a part of who she was. That authenticity had a magnetic pull. Time seemed to stretch. Each moment she performed carried weight, filled with emotion and precision. The room's energy shifted subtly, from polite interest to genuine engagement, from quiet curiosity to intense focus. Every person felt it differently, yet everyone was affected. It was as if the air itself had changed around her. He realized he was learning from her, almost unconsciously. He had been so sure of himself before, so confident in his own abilities, yet here she was, showing him a level of commitment and artistry that he hadn't expected. It challenged everything he had believed about skill, talent, and what it meant to truly connect with people through performance. The judges were leaning forward now, their notes momentarily forgotten as they watched her with unblinking attention. The audience, too, was fully present. Silent but filled with a sense of anticipation, waiting to see where this journey would lead. She hadn't just captured attention. She had created a shared experience, one that united everyone in the room in a single, quiet moment of wonder. He had to admit to himself silently that he had been wrong. She was not just a participant in this event. She was a force to be reckoned with, someone who could change the expectations of everyone around her. And the thought unsettled him more than he wanted to acknowledge. Yet, even with this realization, she showed no arrogance, no desire to dominate the room with her talent. Instead, she moved with a grace and poise that suggested she knew exactly who she was and what she could do. That confidence, quiet and unwavering, was far more powerful than any boastful display he had ever seen. The performance continued, each segment more impressive than the last, each moment building upon the one before it. He felt a mixture of emotions, emotion, unease, curiosity, all swirling together. He found himself questioning his assumptions, reevaluating his understanding of what it meant to be truly skilled, truly remarkable. She was not just performing, she was communicating. And he realized that he had underestimated the power of connection, of presence, of subtlety. He had assumed that the loudest, most confident person always commanded respect. But here she was, showing him that quiet strength could speak louder than any boast or gesture. By the time her performance reached its midpoint, the entire room was completely absorbed. People were no longer thinking about their phones, whispering to neighbors, or glancing at the clock. They were fully present, drawn into a world she was creating with her talent, her focus, and her quiet intensity. He felt a mixture of envy and admiration. Envy, because he had not realized this kind of power could exist quietly, without spectacle. Admiration, because she had achieved it effortlessly, naturally, and without any need for validation. He began to understand that true talent was not about showing off. It was about connecting. It's about being so certain in one's ability that recognition was almost irrelevant. He leaned back in his chair, trying to calm the rapid beating of his heart. He had never experienced a performance that challenged him so directly. It forced him to confront his assumptions and insecurities. Yet he couldn't look away. He didn't want to. She had captivated him completely, and he knew that this was only the beginning of a journey that would leave a lasting impression on everyone present. The room remained silent, the audience captivated, the judges attentive, and he sat there, caught between disbelief and awe. She had stepped onto the stage quietly, almost unnoticed, and now she held the entire room in her grasp. It was a turning point, a moment that would be remembered, and he knew it. He could feel it in every fiber of his being as she continued. He realized that she had changed not only the expectations of the audience, but his own understanding of what it meant to truly perform. Confidence, skill, and dedication were important, yes, but there was something more, something deeper, something that could not be taught, forced, or faked. It was authenticity, presence, an unwavering belief in oneself, and she had it in abundance. By the end of this segment, he knew one thing with certainty. He had underestimated her. He had assumed she would be no challenge, but she had proven quietly and powerfully that he had been wrong. And the realization settled over him, heavy and undeniable as he continued to watch, captivated, and profoundly affected by the talent he had. Once dismissed so casually, the energy in the room shifted completely as she continued. Her talent was no longer something people noticed quietly in the corner of their attention. It had become the center of everyone's focus. The air felt heavier, more intense, as if each movement she made carried weight beyond what anyone had expected. Even those who had come expecting a simple evening of casual performances found themselves holding their breath. Caught in the power of what she was creating, he sat, a strange mixture of awe and disbelief settling over him. He had thought he understood confidence, talent, and performance. He had believed he had seen it all. Yet here she was, quietly and steadily dismantling every assumption he had ever made. His heart beat faster, not with fear exactly, but with the tension of realizing he had misjudged someone completely. The realization unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. The audience had become a single entity, leaning forward in their seats, eyes fixed on her. The polite smiles, the whispered comments, the casual attention, it had vanished. She had drawn them in so completely that the room existed only for her performance. Every eye followed her, every mind attuned to the smallest detail of her movements. The faintest nuance in her expressions, she moved with precision and ease. Nothing about her seemed forced, nothing staged. Every action flowed naturally, as if it had always belonged there, as if she were not performing but simply being herself in the purest form. It was not a performance for applause, it was a communication, a connection, a story told without words. And the effect on everyone in the room was undeniable. He could see the judges leaning closer. Pens paused, their focus unwavering. They were experienced, having seen countless performers, yet even they were caught off guard by her presence. There was a raw honesty in the way she expressed herself, a depth that could not be replicated, that could not be learned simply from technique. It was something deeper, something human, something that reached beyond the surface and resonated with the soul. He felt a strange humility creeping over him. For so long he had relied on his confidence, his skill, his reputation. He had assumed he knew exactly what it meant to captivate an audience, to command attention. And yet here she was, showing him a different kind of mastery, one that did not seek to dominate but to inspire, to move, to leave a lasting impact without ever shouting for recognition. Each moment of her performance seemed to carry a new layer, a new revelation. He realized she had anticipated everything not in a manipulative way, but with a natural understanding of how to engage, how to draw people into her world. Every pause, every glance, every subtle motion was perfectly timed. She was in complete control, not in an obvious, domineering sense, but in the quiet, powerful way of someone who knows their worth and trusts their own ability. The audience's reaction intensified. Faces that had been neutral now showed clear wonder, admiration, and even disbelief. They were not clapping yet, not because they were unappreciative, but because they were fully absorbed, waiting to experience what she would do next. There was a sense of shared anticipation, of collective realization that they were witnessing something rare, something extraordinary. He could not look away. He tried to analyze, to find the flaws, to prepare himself mentally for what would come next. But there were no flaws. Each movement was flawless, each transition seamless. It was as if she had internalized her craft so completely that it had become an extension of herself. It's an inseparable part of her being. And that realization struck him harder than anything else, the idea that someone could possess such confidence, such talent, and yet remain humble and grounded. He thought about the countless times he had walked into a room like this, expecting to dominate, expecting to impress. He had relied on spectacle, on outward confidence, on showmanship. And here she was, quietly redefining what it meant to truly captivate an audience. It was a lesson he had not expected to learn, and yet it was impossible to ignore. As she moved through the performance, the intensity grew. Her expression, her posture, her movements, they told a story that no words could capture. It was a story of dedication, of persistence, of quiet strength. It spoke to the audience in a way that transcended the surface, reaching something deeper, something personal. Everyone in the room felt it, even those who had come expecting nothing more than casual entertainment. He watched as the audience responded in subtle ways. Eyes widened, lips parted slightly, some leaned forward unconsciously. They were drawn in not by spectacle or noise, but by the authenticity and depth of what they were witnessing. She had created a space where attention was inevitable, where connection was automatic, where the impact was profound. He could not help but feel a mixture of emotions and admiration, envy, respect, and a touch of unease. He had never experienced a performance that challenged him so directly, that made him question his assumptions and his confidence. And yet he could not deny the effect it had on him. He was learning, slowly, the true meaning of presence, the power of authenticity, the way talent could move people without ever demanding it. The room remained absorbed in her performance, each moment building on the last. She had a rhythm, a flow, a natural progression that made everything feel inevitable yet fresh. It was not predictable, yet it felt perfectly right. Every detail, every nuance was executed with care and intention. It was not just skill, it was understanding, empathy, and a connection to the audience that went beyond technique. He thought about how he had underestimated her. He had assumed she would be an easy act, someone who would fade into the background, and yet she had proven in every possible way that he had been wrong. She was not only capable, she was extraordinary. She had taken a space where she could have been overlooked and made it entirely her own. As the performance reached its peak, the room was completely silent. Every person holding their breath, every eye fixed on her. There was an energy that could not be contained, a shared understanding that this was a moment of rare significance. He felt it too, deep in his chest, the undeniable truth that he was witnessing something remarkable. When she finally paused, the room remained still for a heartbeat longer, savoring the conclusion. Then, slowly, the applause began. It started quietly, cautiously, and then swelled into a wave of genuine appreciation. Hands clapped, faces lit up, and a collective sense of awe filled the space. People were smiling, leaning forward, exchanging looks that said without words, "Did you see that?" He sat back, processing everything he had witnessed. The realization settled heavily on him. He had been completely wrong to assume she would be no challenge. She had not only met the challenge, she had redefined it, and he felt a deep, almost reluctant admiration for her, the kind that comes from seeing someone exceed every expectation without trying to impress. She returned to her seat at the back, calm and composed as ever. There was no celebration, no boastful gesture, no attempt to claim victory. She simply sat, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But everyone in the room knew better, and he knew it too, even if he struggled to admit it openly. She had left a mark, not just on the audience, but on him as well. A reminder that true talent, quiet confidence, and authenticity could achieve what showmanship alone never could. The final part of the evening was different from the rest. The energy in the room had changed completely, charged with the memory of her performance. People still whispered to one another, trying to put words to what they had witnessed. But the whispers were filled with awe and admiration. She had left an impression that lingered in the air, a quiet power that everyone could feel, even those who had only glanced briefly. He sat in his chair, his mind racing with thoughts he had not expected to have that night. He realized how wrong he had been to underestimate her. He had walked in full of confidence, assuming he understood the space, the competition, and himself. He had believed he could predict the night, predict who would impress, and who would falter. But now, he saw that assumptions were dangerous. That talent could appear quietly and without warning, changing everything in an instant. She had shown him that true skill and presence could not be judged at a glance. The audience had begun to relax, but their attention was still largely fixed on her. Some clapped again, some nodded silently, still processing the depth of what they had seen. The judges exchanged brief glances, acknowledging with subtle movements that this had been extraordinary. Everyone in the room, even those who had arrived indifferent or casual, was affected. She had created a shared experience that could not be forgotten quickly. A story told through talent and authenticity rather than words. He thought about how she had managed it. She had stepped onto the stage without fanfare, without theatrics, and yet she had commanded attention completely. He reflected on how many times he had tried to achieve the same effect with flashier gestures, louder presence, or more aggressive tactics. There was no arrogance, no demand for recognition, only quiet confidence and mastery. And it worked better than anything he had ever attempted. The realization struck him deeply. It was humbling, unsettling, and inspiring all at once. He had assumed that control and attention came from force, from projecting confidence outwardly. But here she had proven that the truest influence came from being fully prepared, fully present, and fully authentic. That lesson hit him harder than any personal triumph he had ever experienced. As the final moments of the evening approached, she remained calm, composed, almost as if she were unaware of the effect she had created. People began to rise from their seats to applaud her, a wave of appreciation spreading through the room. It was spontaneous, heartfelt, a recognition of something beyond technique or performance. It was recognition of presence, of mastery, of the quiet strength that could command a room without demanding it. He stood slowly, joining the applause, but his mind was still caught in reflection. He thought about all the times he had misjudged others, all the moments he had underestimated those who seemed quiet or unassuming. He realized that humility was necessary, that assumptions could blind one to possibility, and that talent often came in forms that were unexpected. She had reminded him of these truths without saying a word, simply through the force of her ability and the steadiness of her character. The applause continued, swelling and echoing in the small hall. She acknowledged it with a slight nod, her composure never wavering. There was no showy bow, no exaggerated smile, no attempt to draw attention to herself beyond what was necessary. Her presence alone had done everything. And in that moment, he understood that this kind of talent was rare, precious, and unforgettable. He felt a sense of respect that went beyond admiration. It was a recognition of the dedication, effort, and authenticity required to achieve something like this. He thought of the hours she must have spent practicing alone, the discipline and focus needed to reach this level. It was more than talented. It was a commitment, a way of being that could not be faked or hurried. And he realized that this was what truly set her apart. People were still talking, still exchanging comments about what they had witnessed. Some called it the best performance they had ever seen in such a setting. Others said it had changed the way they thought about talent and presence. He listened to the conversations around him, absorbing their reactions, and felt a quiet pride in having been able to witness it. Even if he had not expected to be moved so profoundly, she had returned to her seat, composed and calm, yet the room was forever changed by her presence. People had been reminded that brilliance often comes quietly, without fanfare, and that humility and authenticity could be more powerful than confidence and spectacle alone. He sat back in his chair, reflecting on everything he had learned that night. It was more than a lesson about performance. It was a lesson about respect, understanding, and the danger of underestimating others. He knew he would never forget this evening. He knew he would carry the memory of her talent and composure with him for a long time. It was not just the performance itself, but the way she had executed it. The quiet command she had established, the connection she had created with everyone in the room. She had left a mark, subtle but indelible, and he was acutely aware that he had witnessed something rare and extraordinary. The night ended with warm applause and lingering smiles, people slowly making their way out of the hall. Conversations buzzed with excitement and admiration. He followed along, still processing his own emotions, feeling a mixture of humility, awe, and inspiration. He had walked in confident, expecting to dominate, and he had left with a lesson far more valuable than any victory. He had learned about true talent, about presence, about the power of authenticity. As he stepped outside into the cool night air, he took a deep breath. The streets were quiet, the lights soft against the dark sky. He thought back to her, seated calmly among the audience, as if nothing remarkable had happened. And yet, everything had happened. He smiled to himself. Quietly acknowledging the truth, she had challenged him in ways he had not anticipated, left him humbled, and changed his understanding of what it meant to truly captivate, inspire, and leave a lasting impression. It was a night of unexpected lessons, of quiet triumph, and of profound respect. And as he walked away, he knew that the story of her talent would remain with him. A reminder that true skill and presence could never be underestimated, and that the most extraordinary moments often came from the quietest places. The next morning, the memory of the previous night lingered like a quiet echo in his mind. He woke up with thoughts swirling, trying to make sense of what had happened. The performance had left a mark not just on the audience, but on him in a way he had never expected. He replayed every moment, every movement, every subtle gesture she had made. It was impossible to dismiss. Her talent, her presence, her quiet confidence had unsettled him in the most profound way. He thought about the audience, the judges, and the way people had responded. The applause, the nods, the quiet gasps, he remembered them all. But more than that, he remembered the feeling in the room, the shared attention, the energy that seemed to gather around her. He realized that he had been blind to something essential. Talent was not just skill. It was connection, presence, and authenticity. And she had all of that in abundance. He spent the morning replaying the events in his mind, thinking of what he had learned. It was not just a lesson about humility. It was a lesson about perception. How easy it was to underestimate someone based on appearance, demeanor, or quietness. He had assumed she was no challenge because she had not tried to impress, because she had not sought attention. But that was exactly why she was extraordinary. She did not need to perform for validation. Her talent spoke for itself. He wondered what had driven her to be so disciplined and composed. She had spent hours, probably years, honing her craft in silence. There was no need to boast, no need for recognition, just a dedication to her own standards, her own growth. He felt a twinge of regret that he had judged her too quickly, that he had assumed she was not capable of extraordinary things. Throughout the day, he noticed himself observing people differently. He began to see subtle qualities in others that he might once have overlooked. Confidence, he realized, was not always loud. Skill was not always obvious. Presence could be quiet, patient, and deliberate. He felt himself reconsidering his assumptions about talent, about competition, about who could inspire and who could be dismissed. Meanwhile, word of her performance spread. Colleagues, friends, and even strangers began talking about the remarkable display of skill and poise. People described it in different ways. Some focused on her precision, others on the emotional depth she conveyed. But everyone agreed on one point. She had surprised everyone, and she had done so without seeking attention. The ripple of impact extended far beyond the small hall where it had happened. He watched these conversations with a mixture of curiosity and humility. Each retelling, each description, reminded him of the subtle power of what she had done. He realized that her influence was not limited to the audience that night. It extended outward, shaping perceptions, inspiring reflection, and encouraging others to value authenticity over showmanship. She had set an example, quietly and without any conscious effort, that others could only hope to follow. As the day wore on, he found himself reflecting on his own approach. He had spent so much time seeking recognition, chasing approval, and asserting confidence. Yet she had accomplished more by being true to herself than he ever had through force or display. He felt challenged, not by rivalry, but by realization. He had to grow, to refine his own understanding of skill, of performance, of human connection. Her presence had sparked something within him, a desire to improve, to learn to approach his craft with honesty and humility. He thought about approaching her, to speak, to learn, to acknowledge his admiration. But he hesitated. She had already taught a lesson through her actions, and he knew that words were almost unnecessary. Respect, after all, was shown through recognition and understanding, not always through conversation. He decided that he would carry the lesson quietly, let it shape him in his own way, and perhaps find opportunities to apply it rather than merely express it. The evening came again, but the memory of her performance lingered in his mind like a shadow he could not shake. Even in ordinary moments, he found himself recalling her focus, her calm presence, her ability to command attention without demanding it. It influenced how he interacted with others, how he approached tasks, and how he measured his own sense of achievement. He realized that true mastery was not about winning or being noticed, it was about connection, authenticity, and the quiet strength to be oneself.